Welcome back, everybody. Thanks for joining us this Wednesday as we continue through the first chapter of Ruth. Just a quick recap. In the last couple days, we've looked at the text through about verse 14. And at this point, Naomi, who has lost 2 sons and a husband, is urging her daughter-in-laws to go back to their homes where they might have a chance at a life, maybe a remarriage, and to make something of this tough situation they are all in. And one of the sister-in-laws, Orpah, we saw yesterday, kissed her mother-in-law, meaning she said goodbye. And then Ruth, it says, clings to her. And we pick up that story today. And Michael, I think, if Ruth is known for a thing, these words that we're about to hear might be sort of her signature identity. I mean, people may know the story of Ruth, but if they know a thing that Ruth did or said, I think it's likely to be found in these words. So jump in, just read for a few verses, and then we'll come back and unpack it for you. So so Naomi said, "See, your sister-in-law has gone back to her people and her gods. Return after your sister-in-law." But Ruth said, "Do not press me to leave you or to turn back from following you. Where you go, I will go. Where you lodge, I will lodge. Your people shall be my people and your God my God. Where you die, I will die. There I will be buried. May the Lord do thus and so to me, and more as well, if even death parts me from you." When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. So, again, this is Ruth's kind of signature declaration, and it rings of loyalty, of commitment, of courage, and these 2 women are having this conversation. They both want different things, and this is Ruth's way of saying, I'm not doing it, Naomi. I'm not leaving you. And there's this beautiful speech, where you go, I will go. One thing to point out, it gets cleaned up in English a little bit, but this place about your people shall be my people and your God, my God, verse 16, there isn't a verb in that part. It literally just says, your God, your people, my people. So there's I don't want to say a roughness to it, but there's just a declaration to it of this isn't up for negotiation. Where you die, I will die, and I'll be buried there, and may the Lord even do something to me if even death parts me from you. So it is this beautiful declaration that I'm not leaving you. I will change lands. I will go to different people, whatever, where I'm at your side. You are my people, and I'm with you. And I think that's not only beautiful, Michael, which it is, but it characterizes this book. Maybe more than anything we've seen so far, this sets the tone and the stage for the rest of what comes in the story.
I think there may be many, Clint, who will not know much of what came before or after this text, but this will be recognizable because it is just beautiful prose. And I think it should be noted that there are some really historic reasons that make this particularly relevant as well. And I don't think we should rush by them. This idea of returning to the people that you were born with, we see this here, this idea of going back to the other gods in verse 15. There is this idea, there's this racial religious identity, so that when you're born into a people, that identity gives you the gods that you worship. So the returning gives for Orpah this change, this transition, going back to her people is not just a going back home to live with mom and dad for a little while to get back on your feet. That would be our modern conception for this. This is a radical reversal from being in the household of God, going back to not only the house, but the ways of her former people. And when Ruth makes this statement, it is therefore not just a statement of relational faithfulness, though it is. It is also a statement of her commitment to God, and we see that explicitly. Your people be my people, your God, my God. And that commitment is a direct connection or relationship with Ruth's understanding of her relationship to Naomi's God and to, therefore, the Lord, all caps. And I think that this is where a book like Ruth is maybe quiet. It's not a loud book, but it has something to teach us about a relationship with God. That in this confident statement, even a little bit, as you said, Clint, a little bit of a charge. May the Lord do thus and so to me as more as well. A kind of statement, a brash statement of saying that I will make this committed, faithful charge that I will do this thing, and there's nothing going to be that will stand in the way of it. It's a powerful, moving phrase in a story that thus far has not been filled with a lot of agency or strong movements or strong choices. This is maybe the first moment, Clint, where we get a glimpse of someone saying, and this is where I stand.
Yeah, think this through with me, Michael. There are many other parts of the Old Testament where people make vows of one kind or another, but I can't think of one off the top of my head that is so profound from one person to another. There's some vows that are made of as threats. Jezebel threatens Elijah, woe to me if I don't make you like one of the dead prophets by tomorrow. There are some guarantees, some vows that are taken as guarantees. There are vows made before the Lord. But I can't think of any better example where one person commits themselves to another. In fact, these words are so powerful in those lines that many who know their Bible will use these in their weddings. This tends to be, or is often, a wedding passage. This declaration of connectedness, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's not exactly the setting of the text. That's not what it's written for. But it is such an impressive. It is such an impressive commitment that I think it fits that context pretty well. I think we also, interestingly enough, the rest of we can come back to this question near the end of the study, but of all the things that we could look at in this book and say we see something of Ruth's character, this might be the pinnacle. We're going to see Ruth navigate situations throughout the rest of the story. But if you want to look at who Ruth is and her courage and her faithfulness, I think in many ways this is the highlight that the author is showing us, that just this non-negotiable, I'm in with you, come hell or high water, I'm sticking with you by your side, so help me God, in other words. And I think that tells us, I hope we read that intentionally, I think we're correct to do so, that this tells us something significant about who Ruth is and what Ruth is.
And I think it's important to know that in a story that thus far, there's been a lot of movement away. There's been a movement away from Bethlehem because there was no food. And then there's a loss of the husband, loss of the sons. There's been all of this loss and retraction and this movement farther from God. Now there's going to be this moment where Naomi says, I'm going back home. That's my next option. That is too, for her, compulsory. That's the thing she needs to do next. It's response. Clint, this right here, this is a declaration of intent. This is not so much a response to a negative circumstance. This isn't looking for food in another place. This is saying, I am resolutely committed that I will be faithful to be with you. And I think that is courageous, and it is a display of human faithfulness. I think it's both of those things. And it does display Ruth's character. It also displays something about what we might learn about our own Christian character in relation to God in the midst of our own life circumstances. The recognition that we too might find ourselves in circumstances that are bitter, are death and destruction, or sickness and death, as we had the names of those two sons. I think, Clint, one thing that we can learn from this is that we might look at our world as a series of circumstances, but from the lens of Scripture, there's also a lens that we look at our lives from the lens of character. And here we learn something of Ruth's character. We learn of when things get hard, Ruth sticks closer to those that she's been called to. Even if that relationship by marriage is gone, she's going to remain faithful to Naomi. And that is in a very important way, not a complete or perfect way, but yet in a very important way, a reflection of God's perfect faithfulness. She's giving us a small lens to see a much larger reality, and she's doing it in a moment in which she doesn't, in the text, have a lot of power or agency. There's no reason for her to have courage or to be faithful. She should return home, as Orpah did, and there's no judgment for doing that. But here Ruth makes this decision, and it's an admirable, a truly beautiful expression of an exceptional character that could say words like this.
I think as well, a lot of courage, because there's no plan here. Naomi doesn't expect good things for herself back in Judah. This is risky on Ruth's part. Perhaps she'd have a better outcome, or more likelihood of a better outcome, if she did go back. But that's a risk she's willing to take because of her love for and commitment to Naomi. And so she makes it very clear that she's not leaving. And then we end this passage with a really interesting verse. When Naomi saw that she was determined to go with her, she said no more to her. Now, that's pretty tame in English. In the language, there's a little bit of negative sense that almost, not quite, but almost, she didn't talk to her. She was silent to her. And that's led to some speculation. There is a theory. I don't think it's widespread, but there are a few scholars who suggest that maybe Naomi thought she'd have a better chance on her own, and that maybe she's upset that Ruth hasn't listened to her. I think that's hard to read into the text. The Hebrew wording does have a little bit of negative connotation to it, but I think that's too much to put on that one phrase, that one word. I am not a Bible scholar, but I think that's not the most common, and I would argue not the best reading of the text. I think it's largely the way it sounds in English. She knew she wasn't going to listen. This is done. That's a dead horse now. There's nothing else to say in that regard, because it's clear that they continue to have a relationship. And so I don't read this, though some do, as Naomi is angry or upset with Ruth, or that she's, secretly wishes Ruth would leave because she thinks maybe there's more chance for her on her own. It's interesting speculation, but I think ultimately, for me at least, it doesn't hold water.
There's a really interesting aspect to this text, too, that would be very surprising to us in other places of the Old Testament, Clint. Just the sort of command to return to your people, return to your foreign gods, that idea that is embedded in this is a much softer reading than what you're going to have in other places in the Old Testament, where any mention of idolatry or an idolatrous nation is going to be met by immediate black and white, very clear instruction. You must be apart from, it's better to be dead than to be part of that. And here, the author of Ruth offers us, I think, a much softer and more complex human image of that. You have women navigating all of these challenges, and it's very clear that God, the God of Naomi, is all caps Lord, is Yahweh, is the God. But yet there's a kind of softness and awareness that they're making choices that bring people in and out of the family, that does have impacts, and yet there's freedom to go back to the people. And the fact that Orpah is not resoundingly judged, and here Ruth clings so freely and so intentionally to Naomi, and in that way claims Naomi's God as her own in a permanent sense. I think it just adds depth and meaning. It adds complexity complexity to a story like this, because it makes these characters women that we can not only relate to, living in a world where there's lots of gods and non-gods, but we can also relate to, as they seek to be faithful to one another, how that from God's lens can still be a reflection of God's providence in their lives.
I think we don't generally think of gods in terms of regional, Michael. Maybe we think of Islam in the Middle East or Hinduism or Buddhism in Asia, but the idea here is return to your culture. And the translators have tried to help us, because if you look at verse 15, she has returned to her people and her gods, and then you turn over, your God shall be my God, and you'll see that's capitalized. That's all the same word. So when the translators have understood that to be pointed at the Christian God, they've capitalized it, and not in the other case. But it's all the word Elohim. It's the same word in Hebrew. Now, that changes significantly when you get to the back half of verse 17 here, may the Lord, and that is a very specific and unique word for Israel's God. And so here, there is a very specific claim made about which God that Ruth will commit to because of Naomi. And I think we have to see that in the backdrop of the text, because it is the Lord, not in some generic sense, but specifically our God, the God of Israel, who is going to be interwoven through the rest of this story.
No doubt these are beautiful words. No doubt they are an expression of some of the best that can come as humans commit themselves to one another. And I think that is an image in small measure of God's ultimate commitment to us. And we're going to see faithfulness in many different ways appear throughout the rest of this story. So courageous and a beautiful expression of faithfulness. Glad that you were with us for the conversation.
Thanks, everybody. Hope you have a good day. Hope you can join us tomorrow as we continue through Ruth.